I think the Japanese have a choice here. China overall is a more well behaved, simple, and straightforward partner. We respect other nations. I know due to many historical reasons, Japan was kind of following the United States blindly over the decades and is very skeptical when it comes to deepening ties with China. But today, the United States is acting like a psychopath, bullying other countries without limits. No bottom line. I think this is the opportunity for Japan to change direction and lean towards China. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Awakening Podcast, where I share with you the Chinese perspective on global geopolitical events. The Chinese geopolitical analysts slash social media content creator have been updating their videos very frequently since the beginning of the tariff escalation. So there's a sea of opinions out there, very difficult for me to keep track of everything. Today, I'm going to bring back Professor Jin, which I consider to be a Chinese opinion leader who stick very close to the overall mainstream narrative from China. He used to be a visiting professor in the University of Michigan between I think 2003 to 2007, 2008, and is considered to be the leading analyst when it comes to US-China relationship. If you watched some of his video here in my channel before, he's always calm and professional and choose his words carefully, try not to insult politicians or countries, which to me is the correct way when approaching geopolitics in order to stay inclusive and not lock yourself inside a certain narrative cage. But even Professor Jin, the cool-headed analyst, is losing a bit now. Okay, his newest video, updated April the 18th, titled "The United States Has Already Gone Crazy. Japan and China can seize this major strategic opportunity." I'm going to draw a longer conclusion towards the end of this video because I have a different opinion, not just compared to him, but many other analysts as well. But first, let's hear what he has to say in this video.
新的这个信息看啊，美国呢大概会拿那个日本、韩国啊作为突出口。
According to the most recent update, the United States will probably use South Korea and Japan as a breakthrough to set up an example to the rest of the world when it comes to negotiating new economic terms with the United States. This now legendary so-called Mar-a-Lago Accord. Many of us know about the original Plaza Accord, which is a milestone, both economic and trade tension with US in the 1960s and 1970s, which marked the defeat of Japan. The Japanese yen was forced to appreciate its value, distorting the Japanese global trade dominance. This time, this new Mar-a-Lago Accord, from my point of view, Japan again is on the dinner table, along with South Korea this time. Of course, the United States is most eager to bring China onto the table, but China is basically giving US the middle finger. Of course, US also want to take advantage of the European Union, but that would be a much harder negotiation. So that's why US turned its butcher knife to Japan and South Korea first. Okay, pause here for a second. I know people in the comment section wanted me to talk about this Mar-a-Lago Accord. I think most of you who pay close attention to US politics has probably read this article written by Stephen Miran, if not at least heard about it on other channel over the past weeks and months. For people who are not familiar with it, here is a very short summary, okay? It is a proposed economic strategy developed by Stephen Miran, who is now the chair of the US Council of Economic Advisors. The plan aims to reconstruct global trade and monetary relationships by devaluing the US dollar while maintaining its status as the world's reserve currency. The objective include reducing the U.S. trade deficit, revitalizing domestic manufacturing, and realigning international economic relationships. And key components involve implementing tariffs, of course, and then also negotiating currency and capital measures, and also linking trade agreement to national security. That's roughly what it is. Over the years, I have come to visualize the global political and economic structure in a way that I describe as a hierarchy pyramid, okay? With the US on top. This is not a mainstream perspective, not in China, not anywhere. But once you are able to see the structure and understand the mechanics and philosophy behind it, it is difficult to unsee it, okay? It became part of the foundation of how you see the world. I often said that I like Trump as being the ultimate what is that phrase? Mythbuster. You know, the TV shows American watch here called The Mythbuster, which try to run tests to see if some of the urban legend is true or not. For example, can a medieval armor stop a pistol bullet? Let's test it and find out. Trump is like that, okay? Can tariff defeat China? Let's test and find out. It probably won't take that long to find out who can endure the pain and who can't. If there are still people who can see that the US is running a global colonial economic system, just wait and see. My friend here, Trump, will show you exactly how it works. So, this Mar-a-Lago Accord, I will talk about it in another video, but let's continue with Professor Jin's video here, okay? If Japan, for example, signed this new deal with the United States according to the path of the Mar-a-Lago Accord, it will basically surrender its economic sovereignty. This is outrageous. All the burden and responsibility will be dumped on the Japanese. This is a one-way submission to the United States, limiting its own export, increase overpriced US import. The most lethal term is to convert the current US bonds into a century-long bond with no interest payment. This basically means the US doesn't want to pay the money back. From my view, the Japanese wealth, the money the Japanese people earn over the years and decades, those are hard earned money. We are all East Asians, Japan, South Korea, China. The money we earn are all from our honest, hardworking labor, our sweat. The money we saved over the years and decades, now the Americans are asking to take it all away. I mean, this is textbook economic colonialism. This is just too much to swallow for any country. I think a normal person with any ounce of dignity will resist such deal. So if Trump and his team really force Japan and South Korea to agree on those harsh terms, it's going to meet with a lot of resistance. What will be the outcome? I guess it depends. Why Japan can't choose to stand together with South Korea and China, for example? A union among Japan, South Korea, and China would be a force to be reckoned with. China's own manufacturing capacity is around 35% of the world right now, which is more than a third of the world. If Japan and South Korea join, our capacity would exceed over 50% of the entire planet. I think the Japanese have a choice here. China overall is a more well behaved, simple, and straightforward partner. We respect other nations. I know due to many historical reasons, Japan was kind of following the United States blindly over the decades and is very skeptical when it comes to deepening ties with China. But today, the United States is acting like a psychopath, bullying other countries without limits. No bottom line. I think this is the opportunity for Japan to change direction and lean towards China. Of course, I can make the decision for the Japanese, but it's just my prediction. The Japanese won't sign this deal, not easily. You can see what the Japanese Prime Minister said earlier just this week. Let's pause it for just a second here. Now, I talked about the Japanese Plaza Accord in previous video, and I also talked about the plan to form East Asian Economic Union, just like the European Union, and that was a negotiation, I think, 15 years ago after the Asian financial crisis. So here, I don't think it is an easy choice for the Japanese because a few Japanese politicians who were engaged in the previous negotiation 15 years ago die mysteriously, kind of suspiciously, hinting there are potential foul plays there by foreign entities. So you guys know what I mean, right? So we're not talking about Japan making just an economic choice here, but also a political one as well. Whether this is the time to devassalize itself from the United States, or is the cost still too high to do it now? Same choice face the South Koreans, to be honest. Assassinations, coups over the last few months and years in these two countries. Coincidence? I don't think so. Well, there's this common misinterpretation of Plaza Accord. To say that is something US forced Japan to accept is not entirely correct. The full story is more complicated. The Plaza Accord involved 5 major economies: the US, Japan, West Germany, France, and I think the last one is the UK. What happened is that the US led the initiative, but it brought along its European allies to present a united front, forcing Japan into concession or risk diplomatic isolation. So it's not like a bilateral squeeze on the Japanese by the US, but more like an economic intervention cartel led by the US with European participation at the time, targeting the Japan's rising trade dominance. I think also West Germany has to make some sacrifice as well. So theoretically speaking, today Japan has more options. Not just that, there's China who will definitely welcome Japan if it changes strategic alignment, but also European Union is at odds with Trump and the United States at the moment. So there's a lack of a united front against the Japanese, unlike in the Plaza Accord 40 years ago. But at the end, I don't know what dirty tricks US might use over Japan. Let's continue here. In my opinion, Trump is very difficult to predict. He said something today, tomorrow it changes. Yes, he wants to focus on taking on China, increasing tariff to 54% and then to 145%. And now there's rumor that it will be increased to 245. He also said that he's threatening other countries on tariff, which is what brings them to the negotiation table. Some 70 countries, according to Donald Trump, in exchange to 90-day pause. But can this 90 days pause promise be trusted? What if the parties cannot agree on a deal within 90 days? Will the tariff be added again? This is very likely, judging by how Trump is very greedy with his terms. I mean, just look at the case with Ukraine. Trump wants everything. Wants concession from the Ukrainians, want to force Ukraine to accept Russian terms, and also want their resources while giving back basically nothing. He's not going to make many deals with this kind of approach. So at the end, these countries who might seems to be surrendering to US bullying now might still have to end up fighting a tariff war against the United States. The biggest determinant factor here, in my view, is China. If China can withstand the US tariff barrage for, let's say, 90 days or longer and survive intact, It will inspire other countries to stand up and resist as well. They will see US is just a paper tiger, and they might lean on China instead.
立場には隔たりがございます。赤澤大臣からは日米協議の場でアメリカの関税措置は極めて遺憾であるということを述べ、我が国の産業や日米両国における投資、雇用の拡大に与える影響などについて我が国の考えを説明をした上で、アメリカによる一連の関税措置の見直しを強く申し入れたと。
Okay, well, that's the video from Professor Jin. He makes some good points at the end, which you guys can use as a reference as to why China stood firmly against the United States and not willing to back down. Because ever since 2008, China decided to diversify its economic risk and not be tied down by the United States alone. And China has came a long way in building our economic and political relationship with the rest of the world, separate from that of the United States. If China chose to surrender to the United States now, it will completely destroy its national image as a potential alternative to US-led hegemonic world order. The United States, I would say, is also somewhat in the same position. The entire tariff war on the planet is also used as a way to demonstrate to the world that US still has commanding power over its allies and global South countries. If China survived and came out well, it will destroy the strength, or let's say the illusion of strength that the US possesses. So the United States aren't going to back down easily either. It already felt its proxy war against Russia. If now the United States fails its trade war and also the financial war that's happening in the background, it will further weaken its position. So do you guys agree with Professor Jin here? Let me know what you guys think, all right? Well, my political philosophy always built around decisions and consequence, not exactly moral rights or wrong. I think a good way to look at today's China-US competition is like a chess game in which that US is a higher rated player, but China has a longer clock. China might not be as experienced as the United States when it comes to engaging in global geopolitical affairs, but it's got more time to think and respond to each move. The US, on the other hand, might have more pawns and tools in its skill box, but it has to rush through those moves because its clock is running out of time. To be honest with you guys, US is making wild and unpredictable moves lately. And I'm not talking about the direction of those moves. The direction is expected to rescue the empire. What I'm talking about is the method and strategy and also the intensity. It's very eager to end the Ukraine war. It's potentially aiming to start another war in the Middle East. It wants to restructure its global trade balance, and it also wants to restructure domestic economic imbalance. Also, at the very end, one of the ultimate goals is to contain China. It doesn't matter if you agree with those US agenda, but we can all agree that it is best to settle one problem before going to another. If you want to move into another war, you want to end the one you are currently in, right? And also, if you want to, let's say, wage an economic war against China, you might want to rally your allies first and get them on the same side before going after China. Doing all these simultaneously, if it is too early to say Trump and his team is incompetence, maybe the only explanation is that they're just very, very desperate. If I must build a kind of timeline related to US-China relationship over the decades, like I said, 2008 is a turning point, right? Before 2008, US was integrating China into its global economic commonwealth and hoping eventually it can turn China into a Western system democracy, and US can use its soft power to modify China domestically and have it develop in a way that does not threaten the United States' global supremacy. That didn't work out. And after the 2008 financial crisis, US switched its strategy to a semi-isolation strategy, all right? During the Obama administration, US launched TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The goal is to build a new trade bloc in the Asian Pacific, excluding China. There's also this TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, also intended to form a free trade zone that isolates China. And this one didn't happen either, all right? Later, when Trump came to power in his first term, the strategy against China became more aggressive and more direct. Trump put both sanctions and tariffs on China, and that continues throughout the entire Biden administration. Now we are officially in the new phase. I don't even know what we should call this current phase. Do you guys have a name for it? Maybe forced decoupling. It is a force decoupling China and US economically, and also trying to force other countries to decouple from China. I kind of agree with Professor John Mearsheimer that for the for the longevity of the US empire, it is best to not work with a country like China, not to help China grow, because China is too big, too sovereign. US can't keep China under its thumb. And that will always be a threat to the United States in the long run as an empire. Maybe China will rise eventually, but it will definitely take much longer, many more decades longer, if not with the help of the United States. And I will say many Chinese geopolitical analysts agree with that as well, or at least from a geostrategic standpoint. What Trump is doing today, again, for the good of the US empire, should have been done 15, 20 years ago to have a more desirable impact, that is. China's global footprint today is just too big. It is not only painful for the United States to detach from China, but for many other countries as well, making it much difficult task to achieve. In China, we are saying that eventually US will have to retreat to a regional power, a North America power in the future. But I guess Trump wants to go out with a bang, give it another try to see if it can achieve the containment policy against China. I guess, who knows, maybe it will work, but I will say from the perspective of China, the US intention and direction is very clear. Now, China itself, however, I said it before, I'm not happy with how some Chinese geopolitical analysts are approaching this, okay? I have to go deeper in explaining my thoughts, perhaps in another video. Most Chinese today, including many opinion leaders, still struggle to adapt to the new reality of China-US relationship. Their worldview is self-conflicting, I would say. I think that is a good way to put it. Let me explain what I mean by that, all right? Majority of the Chinese see US as a global, hegemonic leader who is supposed to somewhat uphold the global order, financial, monetary, law, order, and so on, and create this kind of fair and balanced atmosphere for the other countries to develop. And they are definitely not satisfied with the US actions lately, and their mentality is to try to pressure US to act more reasonable. All right, that is the word, reasonable. However, in my view, US is an empire who will always prioritize its dominance over global harmony. There is this very well-known metaphor in China that we have to manufacture 1 billion t-shirt in order to exchange for one Boeing 747 airliner from the United States. And well, that is actually a fair trade because when China is industrially weak, you have to trade your sweat. You have to sell your labor cheap in order to snowball your economy. So back then, when we talk about fairness, what it means is that if we exchange 1 billion t-shirt and get one airplane from the Americans, and if the Indians came in and exchanged the exact same t-shirt, but just with 5 million for one plane, we can complain to the Americans that you are being unfair to us, right? Why do we have to make 1 billion t-shirts in order to get one airplane and the Indians only have to make, 500 million? That's you being unfair to me, to the Chinese. For 1 billion, you should be giving me 2 airplanes, right? That is a sound argument, and Americans might adjust and try to treat China and India fairly in this case. Because if you are the captain of a pirate ship or a mafia boss, you have to treat your minions with fairness for them to respect you and continue to follow you as a leader, right? And what China is doing today, and many Chinese still don't realize it, even as I make this video, is that today's China is trying to make the airplane by itself. And from the perspective of the US empire, that's actually China being unfair to the United States because many Chinese have been growing comfortably under the umbrella of the US empire, the US-led global economic system. They forget that US, after all, is a hegemonic empire. So fairness only exists horizontally, not vertically, all right? So US can say, I have this airplane, okay, I will trade it with whoever give me the best quality quantity of t-shirts. If the Indian make better t-shirts in quality, then you Chinese have to give me more of the less quality t-shirts, okay, in order to get the same deal, the same plane. See, I'm being fair, right, as American. But when you start to make airplane, you are dipping your hand into the cookie jar of the Americans. And when I tell you to stop making airplane, stop making computer chips, you need to obey. If you do not obey, that's you disrespecting me as a US empire, global empire. So many Chinese has this kind of illusion that countries and business are supposed to somewhat compete equally. And for decades, it seems to be the case. And that's because we are competing with other countries or US economic colonies. I make better t-shirts. That's why I get the contract. That's why the factory is in Guangzhou, not in Manila. I make better shoes. That's why the factory is in Dongguan and not in, let's say, Bangkok. We won the business because we outcompete you. That's the Chinese thinking and mentality, right? It's a fair world. And US does not have a problem back then with that because you're not in a competition with the United States in the sectors that United States care. But now China is actively and uncontrollably, from the perspective of US, going into a higher value sector that US kept jealously for itself. It's like a drug cartel minion trying to craft out a sector of his cartel's boss business for himself. You think the cartel boss is going to be happy with that? If the cartel boss ignores that, other minions will do the same, and your cartel empire will no longer exist. So from the perspective of the US empire, the US is the boss and China is the, let's say, the driver of a limo. The boss can complain when the driver arrives late and threaten to not give the driver annual bonus if he comes late again. What China is doing here with tariff retaliation is that the boss came late and China is threatening the boss. If he comes late again, I will not drive you to the destination. So I think every Chinese today has to understand that US sees this global US-led unipolar world, right? This hegemony that's built on top of military power, financial power, monetary power, dominance, and all this propaganda. It is ultimately to serve the interests of the United States. That's the priority. It was never really meant to be fair. Fairness is secondary here, okay? And fairness only exists among the colonies, and not even today, I would say, when it comes to try to contain China. Not between colony and the colonial master. And today's US no longer want China in its house, okay? China is being kicked out of the house of the United States. And Chinese need to understand and accept that. If China want to remain in the house of US, it must accept harsher terms and probably eventually be balkanized into smaller states, or else, it will always be a threat to the United States. So all this kind of crying and whining in the Chinese social media right now about US being a bully or, unfair to China, to me, it's rather childish at the end. Ultimately, when you look at the macro perspective, I think it is time for China to decide whether it is time to, leave and start its own, enterprise or business or its own world order. Because any negotiation with US from this point onward is just US trying to, buy time to find ways to decouple from China, from its economic ecosystem with lesser pain. I can see that China today is still hesitating on certain core decisions, especially in the financial monetary sector. And I can see why China want to postpone, understanding that there might be still benefit, or it's better to kind of play along the rules of the Americans for longer until China grow stronger compared to today. But with Trump's recent actions, I think it is about time to seriously consider Plan B. Well, thanks for watching. Remember to like and sub. Have a good weekend and let me know what you think about the things I said, all right?